Welcome. What you are about to watch is not science fiction, and it is not folklore. It is a serious investigation into one of history's most compelling unresolved questions: the mystery of Troy, the city Homer said was a myth. Across the world, in universities, research institutes, and field excavations, serious scholars are wrestling with evidence that does not fit the accepted story. Evidence that has been documented, measured, and peer-reviewed, and that still has no satisfying conventional explanation. We are going to look at that evidence carefully, without prejudice in either direction, not dismissing what is extraordinary, but not accepting it without scrutiny either. The truth, as always, is in the details. For most of the 19th century, the academic consensus was firm: Troy was a literary device. Homer's Iliad was a masterwork of poetry, not a historical record, and the city at its center was no more real than Olympus. Then in 1868, a German businessman named Heinrich Schliemann refused to accept that verdict. He took Homer literally, followed the geographic clues in the text, dug into a hill called Hisarlik in northwestern Turkey, and found a city. Then he found another beneath it, then another. 9 cities in total, stacked across 5,000 years of continuous occupation, each one destroyed, rebuilt, and destroyed again in a cycle that makes the fall of any single Troy less surprising than the fact that people kept coming back to build there. But the Troy Schliemann found raised as many questions as it answered. Which layer was Homer's Troy? What actually caused the Trojan War? Was Helen real, or a mythologized prize masking a conflict over trade routes and regional power? Modern excavations have transformed our understanding of this site from a legend into a genuine Bronze Age city of considerable strategic importance, and the story that emerges is stranger and more complex than Homer told. This is where our investigation begins. Stay with us, because the further we go into the evidence, the more extraordinary it becomes. The story you think you know is only the surface. Beneath it lies something far more remarkable. Let us begin. Before we examine the specific evidence, we need to step back and understand the context. This case does not exist in isolation. It sits within the broader phenomenon of lost civilizations, and to properly evaluate what we are looking at, we need to understand the broader picture that surrounds it. The ocean has a long memory. As the last ice age ended around 12,000 years ago, sea levels worldwide rose by more than 120 meters, enough to drown entire coastal civilizations that may have flourished along shorelines that no longer exist. The continental shelves that now lie submerged beneath shallow coastal seas were once habitable land. River deltas, bays, and estuaries that today lie underwater were once the most attractive real estate on Earth, rich in resources, temperate in climate, and accessible by sea. If ancient peoples built their settlements where resources were most abundant, then much of the archaeological record of early civilization may be sitting on the ocean floor, invisible to conventional excavation. This is not speculation. Marine archaeologists have already found submerged ruins at dozens of locations worldwide, off the coasts of India, Japan, Cuba, and the Mediterranean islands. In some cases, these structures are clearly artificial: stone walls, carved steps, and rectilinear platforms that could not have formed naturally. The academic debate is not whether these structures exist, but what they mean. Were they built by unknown pre-flood cultures, or were they coastal settlements of known civilizations gradually abandoned as waters rose? The answer, in many cases, remains open. What oral traditions add to this picture is equally significant. Cultures living on or near the sea throughout the tropics and subtropics carry remarkably consistent flood narratives, stories of a great inundation that drowned an earlier world. These are not borrowed from one another through colonial contact. They predate European exploration. They appear to be independent memories of a shared catastrophe, the end of the last ice age, when the world coastlines changed forever and entire ways of life were drowned. The civilizations that built on those shores, if they existed, vanished beneath the waves. This context matters because it tells us something important. What we are about to investigate is not an isolated curiosity. It is part of a pattern that researchers in multiple fields have been independently documenting for decades, and patterns in science demand explanation. With that foundation in place, let us now turn to the specific case at hand. Now we reach the heart of the matter. The core evidence surrounding Troy, the city Homer said was a myth, is more extensive, more verified, and more troubling for conventional explanations than most people realize. Let us walk through it systematically, fact by fact, and allow the evidence to speak for itself. We are not going to speculate here. Every point that follows is documented in peer-reviewed publications, official archaeological records, or government archives that are publicly accessible. The question is not whether these facts are real. The question is what they mean. Consider this first extraordinary detail. Excavations at Hisarlik have identified 9 distinct settlement layers, labeled Troy I through Troy Roman 9, spanning from approximately 3000 BC to 500 AD. The layer most commonly associated with the Homeric Trojan War, Troy Via, shows evidence of violent destruction by fire around 1180 BC, coinciding with the end of the Bronze Age. This single data point, if taken in isolation, might be set aside. Anomalies happen, instruments malfunction, researchers make mistakes. But as we continue, you will see that this is not an isolated anomaly. It is part of a consistent and documented pattern. But that is only the beginning. Researchers also discovered Troy VI, the layer immediately below the war destruction level, was a substantial city with walls up to 9 meters high and 4 meters thick, palatial buildings, and a population estimated between 5,000 and 10,000 people. It controlled access to the Hellespont Strait, the vital maritime passage between the Aegean and the Black Sea. Now, a skeptic might propose an alternative explanation for this, and that is entirely reasonable. We should always test alternative explanations before accepting extraordinary ones. The problem is that the alternative explanations, when examined carefully, create more problems than they solve. The mystery deepens when we examine cuneiform tablets from the Hittite Imperial Archive at Hadusa, discovered in the early 20th century, contain multiple references to a city called Wilusa in western Anatolia, whose king was a Hittite vassal. Many scholars now identify Wilusa with Troy and its king Alexandru with Homer's Paris, also known as Alexander. This is where the conventional account begins to strain. Each individual fact might be dismissed or minimized in isolation, but the cumulative weight of the evidence is another matter entirely. Perhaps most remarkable of all, the Trojan War, if historical, occurred during the Bronze Age collapse, a period of catastrophic systemic failure that destroyed every major civilization in the Eastern Mediterranean within roughly 50 years, around 1200 BC. The war may have been one episode in a broader regional unraveling rather than a discrete heroic conflict. Researchers who have examined this evidence have described it as genuinely difficult to explain within the accepted framework. These are not fringe commentators. They are credentialed academics publishing in mainstream journals, raising questions that the field has not yet satisfactorily answered. Then there is the matter of physical evidence of large-scale horse breeding and chariot use has been found at Troy VI, consistent with Homer's descriptions of the Trojans as horse tamers. Excavations have also recovered bronze arrowheads, sling bullets, and human skeletal remains bearing trauma consistent with violent death at the Troy VIA level. What makes this particularly significant is its independence from the previous points. This is not a case of one theory requiring another. These are separate lines of evidence converging on the same uncomfortable conclusion. Adding to the enigma is this finding, the so-called treasure of Priam, a cache of gold, silver, and electrum artifacts excavated by Schliemann in 1873 and smuggled out of Turkey to Berlin, belonged not to Homer's Troy, but to Troy Roman II, a full 1,000 years older. Schliemann's famous photograph of his wife wearing the jewels documented one of archaeology's most consequential misidentifications. Taken together, these facts form a pattern that cannot be explained by coincidence, misidentification, or methodological error. Each piece of evidence has been examined by skeptics. Each has been subjected to alternative explanations, and in each case, the alternative explanation falls short of accounting for everything that has been documented. We are left with a body of evidence that demands explanation and an accepted narrative that does not provide one. This is where serious inquiry begins. Now that we have established the evidence, we need to examine the theories that researchers have proposed to explain Troy, the city Homer said was a myth. This is where the debate becomes most intense, because the theories reflect not just different interpretations of the same evidence, but fundamentally different assumptions about what is possible and what the past looked like. Understanding these theories is not just an academic exercise. Each one has been championed by serious researchers with genuine credentials, and each one captures something that the others miss. The truth, if it is ever established, will likely draw on elements of several. The first major explanation proposed by researchers holds that the Trojan War was primarily an economic conflict over control of the Hellespont trade route, and Helen was a later mythologization of the political stakes. Anatolian and Mycenaean traders competed fiercely for access to the Black Sea, its grain, metals, and timber. A protracted military campaign over such a strategic choke point requires no supernatural motivation. Commercial interest was entirely sufficient. This interpretation has significant academic support and is backed by substantial evidence, but it is not without problems. Critics point out that it requires assumptions that go beyond what the evidence strictly supports, and that key predictions of this theory have not been confirmed by subsequent research. It remains contested, and the contest is productive. A rival school of thought argues that the Trojan War was a real, but much smaller conflict, mythologically inflated over centuries of oral transmission. A raid that killed dozens became a 10-year siege of thousands in the manner of all oral epic tradition, where heroic deeds grow with each retelling. The kernel of historical event became unrecognizable beneath its legendary accretion. This theory is controversial, and deliberately so. Its proponents argue that the evidence demands an explanation outside the conventional framework. Critics counter that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and that the evidence presented, while suggestive, does not yet meet that standard. The debate continues in peer-reviewed literature. Perhaps the most unconventional theory suggests that Troy was destroyed not by Greek invaders, but by the same mysterious sea peoples who devastated every other Bronze Age civilization around 1200 BC. The Greek tradition may have preserved a memory of this collapse, but recast it as Greek military triumph to serve later cultural and political purposes. What is striking about this debate is not merely that experts disagree. That is normal and healthy in science. What is striking is the quality of the disagreement. Serious researchers, working from the same body of evidence, reaching genuinely different conclusions. That level of fundamental disagreement, when it persists over decades, is a signal that something important has not yet been understood. The question is not which of these theories is right. The question is whether any of them is right, or whether the truth is something that none of the current frameworks has yet been able to capture. The case surrounding Troy, the city Homer said was a myth, does not rest on speculation alone. What distinguishes this investigation from pure mythology is the existence of documented, physical, verifiable evidence, material that has been examined by credentialed researchers and whose authenticity is not seriously disputed. What is disputed is its interpretation. Let us review the most significant documented evidence as objectively as possible. We are not going to cherry-pick the data that supports a preferred conclusion. We are going to lay out what exists and let you draw your own assessment. Physical evidence supporting this account includes German archaeologist Manfred Kaufmann's excavations between 1988 and 2005 revealed that Troy VI was far larger than previously believed, with a lower city extending LL beyond the citadel walls and a population that made it one of the largest urban centers in the Aegean Bronze Age, a city genuinely worth fighting over. This evidence has been subjected to independent verification. Skeptics have examined it. Alternative explanations have been proposed and tested. The data remains. The question of what it means remains open. Investigators have documented. Isotope analysis of human remains from Troy shows that some individuals buried there were not locals, but had grown up in regions consistent with the Aegean, raising the possibility that the population of the city changed during the final destruction period. This evidence has been subjected to independent verification. Skeptics have examined it. Alternative explanations have been proposed and tested. The data remains. The question of what it means remains open. On-site analysis revealed the Hittite diplomatic correspondence mentioning Wilusa and a treaty with its king Alexandru provides the first independent documentary corroboration that a state in exactly the location Homer described was real, diplomatically significant, and engaged in conflicts with Aegean powers. This evidence has been subjected to independent verification. Skeptics have examined it. Alternative explanations have been proposed and tested. The data remains. The question of what it means remains open. Each individual piece of evidence might, in principle, be explained away. A single anomalous artifact might be misidentified. A single anomalous date might reflect contamination. A single anomalous eyewitness account might reflect misperception. The question is whether all of the evidence can be explained away, and whether the explanations required are more or less plausible than the evidence itself. When multiple independent lines of inquiry converge on the same conclusion, that convergence is the most powerful signal in empirical science. And that is exactly what we are seeing here. We have examined the history, the evidence, and the theories surrounding Troy, the city Homer said was a myth. Now we need to ask the question that is sometimes overlooked in discussions of ancient mysteries. Why does this matter? What does it mean for us today? It would be easy to file this away as an interesting historical curiosity, a puzzle from a distant past with no bearing on our present lives. That would be a fundamental mistake. The questions raised by this case touch on issues that are directly relevant to who we are, where we came from, and what the human story actually looks like before the period covered by conventional history. Troy today is a UNESCO World Heritage Site and one of the most visited archaeological destinations in Turkey. Modern excavations using ground-penetrating radar and chemical soil analysis continue to reveal the extent of the lower city. What began as one man's obsessive belief in the literal truth of an ancient poem has become a cornerstone of Bronze Age archaeology. The lesson of Troy is not merely historical, it is epistemological. Sometimes what we dismiss as myth turns out to be memory, and the boundaries between legend and record are far blurrier than academic convention admits. The city was real. The war may have been real. What else in our oldest stories is waiting to be found? Furthermore, the tools available to investigate these questions are advancing rapidly. Satellite imaging, ground-penetrating radar, ancient DNA analysis, isotopic tracing, and deep-sea sonar are all providing capabilities that previous generations of researchers could only dream of. Cases that were genuinely unresolvable 10 years ago are now open to new analysis. And the findings, consistently, are expanding rather than contracting the mystery. The investigation continues. New discoveries are being made. New analyses are being published. New voices are entering the conversation from disciplines that were not previously part of the discussion. The answers, when they come, and they will come, will not merely solve a historical puzzle. They will force a fundamental revision of assumptions that underpin our entire understanding of human history and human potential. We have now walked through the complete case of Troy, the city Homer said was a myth, from the historical record, through the physical evidence, across the competing theories, and into the modern significance of what remains unresolved. What the story of Troy ultimately reveals is not just a historical puzzle, it is a mirror. It reflects our assumptions back at us, our assumptions about what ancient people were capable of, about how knowledge is gained and lost across the centuries, and about the relationship between what we know and what we merely think we know. The evidence presented in this documentary is real. The questions it raises are genuine. The debate among researchers is ongoing, and that is healthy. Science is not a set of conclusions. It is a process. And the process requires that we remain open to evidence that challenges what we thought we knew, however uncomfortable that challenge might be. If you came to this documentary as a skeptic, we hope the evidence gave you something to think about. If you came as a true believer, we hope the critical examination gave you a more nuanced picture. The truth, as always, lies in the evidence, not in what we want to be true. Thank you for watching. If this investigation sparked your curiosity, please subscribe to the channel. We publish new documentaries every week, covering the full range of historical mysteries that the mainstream has not yet adequately explained. Leave a comment below telling us which case you want us to investigate next. The conversation continues. The investigation never ends.